Baby, can't you see I'm calling? A guy like you should wear a warning. It's dangerous, I'm falling.
Welcome to Nuked Radio. This is episode 96. Today is Tuesday, February 26, 2013. I am your host, Christina Consolo, and with me today is Noki Traverse of radwatch.info. And Jules is in the background too. Hi, guys.
Hey, Christina.
Jules,
Hey,
what was this article you sent me this morning about DARPA looking into ionizing radiation mitigation?
Yeah, that was pretty interesting, wasn't it? They put out, I don't know if it was an RFP or an RFI looking for information or for pricing on the creation of some sort of anti-ionizing radiation drug. And what I found really kind of a coincidence that went along with that is, we're really getting pushed toward the brink of World War III, if you're paying attention kind of what's going on with Iran and Syria and Russia. And it makes me wonder, Fukushima obviously wasn't enough, but now we have Russia buzzing Guam with jets that have nuclear missiles on them, and all of a sudden DARPA is looking for some sort of anti-ionizing radiation drug. So, I don't know, heads up. And wait, wasn't there a country about a month ago that started running like ads? Wasn't it in India or in Pakistan? I believe it was in Pakistan or India, about preparing for an imminent nuclear attack.
Yeah, they told their people to build bomb shelters.
Yeah, that was pretty horrifying. So
it is, and the weather situation over the weekend has been kind of horrifying too. It's just the same chaotic pattern that's been continuing and repeating with this huge winter storm in the center of the country. And I dropped a link into the Intellicast radar for you guys at the top of the hour. And that huge mass, that storm, is working its way up into my area. We're supposed to be under a winter storm warning starting at 3 today. And they've had really strong storms in the south. Texas had some really bad storms yesterday. Florida, and it looks like Florida's continuing today too. And then of course we have all the, let's see here, a couple of headlines. On Any News, this was posted in the LA Times today. NOAA is going to start testing wildlife for Fukushima contamination, which is interesting since they've never shared the seal tests with us and what the breakdown of cesium, strontium, or plutonium might have been in those seals. This was written by Aaron Brown, published February 25th. In the coming months, 3 researchers and colleagues at the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration and other institutions plan to analyze hundreds more bluefin tuna, as well as albacore, mahi-mahi, ocean sunfish, opa, makos, blue and salmon sharks, loggerhead turtles, and sooty shearwaters, a type of migratory seabird. They'll examine samples collected in New Zealand, Hawaii, and Alaska, as well as in California. They might look through archive specimens for salmon and whales to test. Other research groups may track the contamination to study marine animals too. If scientists find Fukushima radiation in swordfish, for example, it will be the first evidence that the species migrates across the entire Pacific. They're kind of spinning this to be a learning opportunity. They concluded that their tracking method had worked in the past and that Fukushima provided an unprecedented opportunity for scientists to use radioactive tracers to follow animal movement. This was just nature being amazing, said Nicholas Fisher of Stony Brook University. He imagines pulling together a map of the Pacific crisscrossed by the paths of radiation-toting animals, an amazing image of transport, all from a little dot in Japan, Madigan said.
I'm on the radio right now. I don't like finding.
Well, there's Noki. He's on the phone. There was another wonderful interview from Helen Caldecott. Fukushima disaster, the worst thing that's ever happened. I've never seen anything so despicable in decades. Caldecott said, it takes my breath away. I've never seen anything so despicable in my 40 or 50 years of being a doctor, that people are being ignored in the face of great danger. At 11 minutes into the audio, she says, I watched the accident and thought, my God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, ever. And Arnie Gunderson verified the worst industrial accident ever to have occurred. It's irreparable, and it can't be cleaned up. And there is a link to the full audio from that interview on Any News. Also, Arnie Gunderson said that he's getting reports from Japan of deformed children and troubled pregnancies after Fukushima, but that's been going on for a while. He says at 5:30 in on the interview, the Fairwind site has been getting a lot of anecdotal evidence from people all over northern Japan. We just got an email last week from a woman whose 2 sisters were pregnant. One child was born deformed and the other died in the womb. And they were pregnant during the accident, and they could tell a metallic taste on their tongues and all that kind of stuff. So I am concerned that the Japanese government isn't properly accounting for that. Gunderson also mentions Caldecott's symposium, and for details of the symposium and how you can attend, it's going to be March 11th through 12th in New York City. You can visit nuclearfreeplanet.org. I believe Libby Halevi from Nuclear Hot Seat is going to be attending, and I'm hoping that they're going to have Ustream of the event. I haven't been able to confirm that yet. Hey, Noki.
Hey.
I wanted to find out from you, what was the rad situation over the weekend? Because we had all these severe winter storms, and we had all the thunderstorms going on in the south, which is still kind of continuing the same pattern. What have you been noticing with the radiation monitors?
One location is Sitka, Alaska, which is it's very southern Alaska. It's a bunch of islands. It's right on the Pacific. They've been elevated over 25% for 3-4 weeks. And that's very unusual. I've seen some rises coming through the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle-Portland area, caught a little wave. We saw some waves on the southern flyways, Arizona, Ponca, Oklahoma. We got a rise out of Texas yesterday. So when I first started watching, your graphs run pretty typically. They might go up a little bit and they might go down a little bit. But we've been seeing where these waves take place, where the radiation in the background goes up and up for hours and climbs and climbs. And it's at first it was only happening in 1 or 2 places. But I've been seeing the same phenomena occur quite a bit. Chicopee, Mass. has a slightly elevated background. Western North Carolina was elevated yesterday. So it's pockets. I have to check the wind maps and the jet stream and the vapor loops. And we have a lot of activity always around the Great Lakes. I also noticed that your home state of Michigan, that Warren, Michigan, got quite elevated over the weekend.
Okay. We had a lot of snow this weekend. I dropped a link into chat for you guys of a map, a really, really nice CONUS wide view of the entire Pacific that Jules found, and we linked it to the Sky Tools page on Fukushima Facts. The wind map is also up there. All the radiation monitors are up there, our favorite blogs. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So, Jules said someone left it in chat for us on the last show. So thank you. We posted it, and we were going to put a link to a new earthquake map, too, that Jules came across from Siri. That's the New Madrid watch, and just over the last 2 weeks, there's been like 12 or 14 earthquakes in the area. They're small. They're 3s, 2s at the most, a couple of 1.5s, but they've been in Missouri and Tennessee, and then, we've had a couple of quakes in Arkansas and Alabama. So we need to keep an eye on that too.
The rads were up in Louisiana around the sinkhole area also, up and down, and just before the earthquake, there was a rise down there.
There was also a sinkhole that opened up on the Garden State Parkway in New Jersey over the weekend that took out like 20 cars. It was a little one, but it was really deep. And so anybody that hit it like busted their tie rods and their, it was, you could see all these cars. There was like a helicopter view of the highway, and all these cars pulled off to the side that it hit this hole. A couple of other points of interest. In fact, we're going to play a clip towards the end of the show of Steven Starr, who's the director of the Clinical Lab Science Program at the University of Missouri, who was interviewed by Rick Wiles of TruNews on January the 21st. And the interview's an hour long, but there was a 20-minute segment that was posted yesterday. It's very informative. I haven't had time to check out the whole interview yet, but I certainly am going to. The other big news this weekend was Hanford. And Noki, you and I had kind of joked about Hanford on Thursday. Like, we need to do a show about it. We could do like a whole month of shows on Hanford. It's just a cesspool of radioactive waste. And Friday night I was on Wide Awake News with Karen Quinn-Tostada and Charlie McGrath, and we talked about Hanford quite a bit, because just before the show started, the governor of Washington State had came out and said, oh, it's not one tank that's leaking, it's 6. But there's been leaks that have been going on there for years and years and years. And I came across a clip from Rachel Maddow, who talked about the retaliation that some whistleblowers faced that work at Hanford. This clip came out a little over a year ago, but she actually interviews the whistleblower, and it was really a great audio. Do we have that queued up?
Ready to roll, Hanford?
Yep.
In 1943, what we used to call the War Department took over 2 small towns in Washington State, 2 towns called Hanford and White Bluffs, 2 farming communities on the banks of the Columbia River. The people who lived in Hanford and White Bluffs were given a month or so to clear out completely. They were told to leave their homes, abandon their crops. Some of the farmers burned their fields in protest. The people did not want to go. And that was not helped by the fact that the reason the government was taking their land was classified. But 2 years later, on August 9th, 1945, the world learned the War Department's secrets at Hanford. The plutonium for the atomic bomb that the United States dropped on Nagasaki, Japan, which killed more than 70,000 people in its immediate aftermath and tens of thousands more in the following years. That plutonium for that bomb was made at Hanford. This is a replica of that 10,000-pound bomb. Little Boy was the bomb they dropped on Hiroshima. That was a uranium bomb. But the one they dropped on Nagasaki, that one was called Fat Man, and it was plutonium. It was plutonium from Hanford. Hanford very quickly grew to become one of the largest nuclear facilities in the world. It had 9 reactors, it employed tens of thousands of people, and it created plutonium for nuclear bombs throughout the Cold War. In 1988, the government shut down Hanford. The Department of Energy switched from the nukes building business to the nukes cleaning up business. There are billions of gallons of waste at Hanford. And cleaning up has not gone all that well. As the Seattle Times put it earlier this year, some of the hottest radioactive waste from Hanford was funneled into concrete and carbon steel tanks that today are decades past their projected lifespan. Some have spontaneously heated up or burped explosive gases. 67 are suspected to have leaked. At least 1 million gallons of radioactive goo has spilled into the ground and is working its way to the Columbia River. Yeah, what everybody agrees is the most contaminated site in North America is right on the beautiful Columbia River, which, among other things, is the lifeline for about 10,000 farmers and dozens of commercial fisheries. So the Hanford cleanup in Washington State is a tough situation. The Energy Department is in charge there. They hired the Bechtel Corporation to do the work, It's a multi-billion-dollar project on a 600 square mile site that, again, is the most contaminated place on the continent. And now a senior engineer on site who works for a subcontractor to Bechtel said something is very wrong there. Last week, Hanford engineer Dr. Walter Tamasitis, who works for a subcontractor to Bechtel called URS, Dr. Tamasitis testified before a Senate committee. Doctor told senators that after he raised concerns about the cleanup project being dangerously rushed by Bechtel and URS in order to hit deadlines and get bonuses, after he raised concerns that shortcuts being taken with Hanford's radioactive mess could lead to more radioactive leaks or explosions or fires, he says he was taken off his job. He wasn't fired, but in sort of classic fashion, he was reassigned to a basement office that happened to house 2 working copying machines. Quote, I've been sitting in a basement office now for nearly 16 months, he told senators.
And I assume Bechtel's still in charge?
Bechtel's still in charge of the project, yes, Senator.
And everyone sees you go to work in the basement with no windows?
Yes, ma'am.
And knows that you are not allowed to work even though you're there on site and getting paid?
Correct.
So every day you are an example to all the workers there, whether they're federal employees or Bechtel employees. Don't say anything or you and 2 will be banished to the basement.
Yes, Senator, very directly. It's a very visible example of what happens if you speak up.
It's just unbelievable to me that we've allowed this to occur.
Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri. So Dr. Tamasitis works for URS. URS works for Bechtel. Bechtel works for the Energy Department. We called all 3 of those entities today to respond. URS told us they fully support Dr. Tamasitis' right to raise safety concerns, but they say they do not agree with his assertion that he suffered retaliation for doing so. Bechtel told us, too, that safety and quality are Bechtel's top priorities, and they do not tolerate retaliation or harassment in any form against anyone who raises a concern. Bechtel said they strongly dispute Dr. Tamasitis' version of the facts. The Department of Energy similarly told us that retribution for raising safety concerns will not be tolerated. They said they are committed to continuing to improve our approach to safety at Hanford. All of those statements are available in full at maddowblog.com tonight if you want to see them. But I would just say 2 things here. Well, 3 things here. First, did I mention this is the most contaminated site on the continent? And it's right on the Columbia River? All right, so that's first. But also, there's also been an independent look-see into this situation already. Your tax dollars pay for something called the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board. And frankly, you're psyched that your tax dollars pay for that because it's a board of nuclear scientists that's appointed by the White House and that is independent from anyone else. It's their job to look into safety issues at nuclear stuff that the Energy Department is responsible for. They looked into what's going on at Hanford, and they said this. The investigative record demonstrates that both DOE and contractor project management behaviors reinforce a subculture that deters the timely reporting, acknowledgement, and ultimate resolution of technical safety concerns. And at one point, I should say, if the name Bechtel is ringing a bell for you while we've been talking about this, it is probably because you remember Bechtel as one of the giant contractors that got huge rebuilding contracts in Iraq. Billions of dollars worth of Iraq rebuilding contracts. How did Bechtel do there? Quote, Bechtel National met its original objectives on fewer than half of the projects it received as part of a $1.8 billion reconstruction contract, while most of the rest were canceled, reduced in scope, or never completed as designed. Titus and Tom Carpenter is an attorney and executive director of a nonprofit group called Hanford Challenge, which has been a critic of conditions at the Hanford site. Thank you both for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Tamasitis, can you describe your safety concerns at Hanford for the non-nuclear engineers among us?
Yes, ma'am. The major concern is poor mixing in the vessels, the tanks that process the hazardous nuclear waste. And if you have poor mixing in the tank, you can build up solids. The solids can trap hydrogen gas. You can have solids build up on the bottom of the tank, which can lead to a criticality. So the trapping of hydrogen gas can lead to a fire or an explosion, and the solids buildup could lead to a criticality.
Is that something that is an inevitability of the difficulty of this project, or is there a way they could handle that issue more safely if they're willing to take more time or spend more money?
It can be addressed. It's a chemical plant, first of all. It's not a nuclear plant, as people describe it. It's a chemical plant that processes a nuclear waste. The waste is like a very thick ketchup with sand in it, and they have to improve the mixing in the vessel. There's a couple ways to do it, and they need to address that in order to make the process safe.
Mr. Carpenter, let me ask you a question. I know that Dr. Tomasidis is not the only whistleblower who has come forward from Hanford. I know that you have represented a couple of others. What other concerns have you known to be raised by whistleblowers at the site?
Well, there are several other whistleblowers. One is the manager of nuclear safety at the waste treatment plant there. And she was raising concerns about the risks of hydrogen explosion and the fact that it could catch on fire and the reducing of safety margins at the site. And this manager recently filed a whistleblower retaliation claim with the Department of Labor. Another engineer, scientist, was working for the Department of Energy. He still works there, and he's been raising concerns about how mixing in the tanks could lead to corrosion and erosion in the tanks, and actually wear a hole through the tanks, which obviously is not good for the nuclear process. That could lead to a leak or a release of radioactive material, which could harm the public. Both of these individuals have said, like Dr. Tomasidis here, that their concerns have been suppressed, that they felt harassment.
In terms of, Dr. Tomasidis, let me go back to you. In terms of your safety concerns, and again, speaking to a public that may not be, including myself, all that familiar with the processes that you're describing there, what is the greatest risk that you think is possible here based on sort of corners that you've seen cut? Are we looking at something that could be more than the kind of leaks that Hanford has already experienced? Are we talking about something that could be a larger release of radioactive material?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Rachel, we are. If we have poor mixing, we could trap hydrogen gas. We could end up with a fire or explosion, as we saw on the TV at Fukushima in Japan.
You have more than 40 years experience in this field, Doctor, as a highly skilled nuclear engineer. Since you have raised these concerns on site, what have you been spending your days doing for these past 16 months? What has your job been since you started raising concerns?
I was assigned to a basement office, and in the basement, I keep myself busy by reading technical papers and trying to stay abreast of the technologies.
Mr. Carpenter, one last question for you. The Department of Energy owns this site and is responsible for meeting deadlines and trying to keep costs under control. They are also in charge of overseeing that work, overseeing the work to do the cleanup at Hanford. That is the hardest thing for me to understand here as somebody who's just concerned about this in terms of safety and good government. Is the Department of Energy effectively overseeing itself here?
I'd have to say no, and others agree with me. But it's hard to be an owner as well as a regulator, and I think most people understand that. But the commercial side of the nuclear industry has a separation between the owner, which is the owner of a nuclear reactor, for instance, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which doesn't own anything, right? They're just there to protect the health and safety of the public. So there's a separation that we expect to happen, but that's not true at Department of Energy facilities. And it's something that the taxpayer, I think, should demand, as well as Congress, that there be a separation so that there isn't a conflict with owning the site and regulating yourself.
That's it.
Wow. You know, I knew Hanford was bad, but it really never occurred to me there could be hydrogen buildup in these tanks. That's really scary. You know, there's so much possibility of an explosion there. And then what do we do? Nan was just commenting in chat about using the nitrogen injection. Noki, you have some understanding about how that process works. I know that Fukushima has been doing that endlessly to try to keep the hydrogen levels down.
Yeah, the first thing that came through my little waste treatment head was, well, why aren't they forcefully bubbling up nitrogen from the bottom of the tanks? And that mixes and suspends things and would remove the hydrogen. But there's really a big question here. Is But all these people have terrible track records. They're the people that got us into this mess. So we're asking the people who have always performed in this manic fashion. If my behavior was like this, they'd stop me. Hey, you can't work like this. You can't cut corners at a nuclear cleanup site, the greatest single cleanup site on the planet, probably. And I've been hearing about it my whole life, Christina.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Savannah River does not have it that much more together than Hanford.
Yeah. I wanted to read some background on the Hanford site for people because I don't know if everyone realizes what that site was originally intended for. The Hanford site is a mostly decommissioned nuclear production complex on the Columbia River in the U.S. state of Washington, operated by the United States federal government. The site has been known by many names, including Hanford Project, Hanford Works, Hanford Engineer Works, or HEW, and Hanford Nuclear Reservation, or HNR. It was established in 1943 as part of the Manhattan Project in the town of Hanford in south central Washington. The site was home to the B reactor, the first full-scale plutonium production reactor in the world. Plutonium manufactured at the site was used in the first nuclear bomb tested at the Trinity site, and in Fat Man, the bomb detonated over Nagasaki, Japan. During the Cold War, the project was expanded to include 9 nuclear reactors and 5 large plutonium processing complexes, which produced plutonium for most of the 60,000 weapons in the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Nuclear technology developed rapidly during this period, and Hanford scientists produced many notable technological advancements. However, many of the early safety procedures and waste disposal practices were inadequate, and government documents have since confirmed that Hanford's operations released significant amounts of radioactive materials into the air and the Columbia River, which threatened the health of residents and ecosystems. The weapons production reactors were decommissioned at the end of the Cold War, but the decades of manufacturing left behind 53 million U.S. gallons of high-level radioactive waste, an additional 25 million cubic feet of solid radioactive waste, 200 square miles of contaminated groundwater beneath the site, and occasional discoveries of undocumented contaminations that slow the pace and raise the cost of cleanup. The Hanford site represents 2/3 of the nation's high-level radioactive waste by volume. Today, Hanford is the most contaminated nuclear site in the United States and is the focus of the nation's largest environmental cleanup. While most of the current activity at the site is related to the cleanup project, Hanford also hosts a commercial nuclear power plant, the Columbia Generating Station, and various centers for scientific research and development, such as the Pacific Northwest National Lab and the LIGO Hanford Observatory. The Hanford site occupies 586 square miles in Benton County, Washington, roughly equivalent to half of the total area of Rhode Island. This land is currently uninhabited and is closed to the general public, although they do offer tours. It is a desert environment receiving under 10 inches of annual precipitation. The Columbia River flows along the site for approximately 50 miles, forming its northern and eastern boundary. The original site was 670 square miles. Some of the land has been returned to private use and is now covered with orchards and irrigating fields. In the year 2000, large portions of the site were turned over to the Hanford Reach National Monument. The site is divided by function into 3 main areas. The nuclear reactors were located along the river in an area designated as the 100 area. The chemical separation complexes were located inland at the Central Plateau, designated as the 200 area, and various support facilities were located in the southeast corner of the site, designated as the 300 area. The site is actually bordered on the southeast by the Tri-Cities, a metropolitan area composed of Richland, Kennewick, Pasco, and smaller communities, and home to over 230,000 residents. Hanford is a primary economic base for these cities. The early history. The confluence of the Yakima, Snake, and Columbia rivers has been a meeting place for native peoples for centuries. The archaeological record of Native American habitation of this area stretches back over 10,000 years. Tribes and nations, including the Yakama, Nez Perce, and Umatilla, used the area for hunting, fishing, and gathering plant foods. Hanford archaeologists have identified numerous Native American sites, including pit house villages, open campsites, fishing sites, hunting and kill sites, game drive complexes, quarries, and spirit quest sites. And 2 archaeological sites were listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1976. About the Manhattan Project. During World War II, the Uranium Committee of the Federal Office of Scientific Research and Development sponsored an intensive research project on plutonium. The research contract was awarded to scientists at the University of Chicago Metallurgical Laboratory, or METLab. At that time, plutonium was a rare element that had only recently been isolated in a University of California lab. The METLab researchers worked on producing chain-reacting piles of uranium to convert it to plutonium and found ways to separate plutonium from uranium. The project was accelerated in 1942 as the United States government became concerned that scientists in Nazi Germany were developing their own nuclear weapons program. In September of 1942, the Army Corps of Engineers placed the newly formed Manhattan Project under the command of General Leslie Groves, charging him with the construction of industrial-sized plants for manufacturing plutonium and uranium. He recruited the DuPont Company to be the prime contractor, and DuPont recommended that it be located far away from the existing uranium production facility at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The ideal site was described by this criteria: a large and remote tract of land, a hazardous manufacturing area of at least 12 by 16 miles, space for laboratory facilities at least 8 miles from the nearest reactor or separations plant, no towns of more than 1,000 people closer than 20 miles from the hazardous rectangle, no main highway, railway, or employee village closer than 10 miles, a clean and abundant water supply, a large electric power supply, and a ground that could bear heavy loads. In December of 1942, Groves dispatched his assistant, Colonel Matthias, and DuPont engineers to scout potential sites. Matthias reported that Hanford was ideal in virtually all aspects, except for the farming towns of White Bluffs and Hanford. General Groves visited the site in January and established the Hanford Engineer Works, codenamed Site W. The federal government quickly acquired the land under its eminent domain authority and relocated some 1,500 residents of Hanford, White Bluffs, and nearby settlements, as well as the Wanapum and other tribes using the area, although they still allow them to fish in the Columbia River. Nearly 50,000 workers lived in a construction camp near the old Hanford town site, while administrators and engineers lived in the government town established at Richland Village. Construction of the nuclear facilities proceeded rapidly, and before the end of the war in 1945, the HEW built 554 buildings at Hanford, including 3 nuclear reactors and 3 plutonium processing canyons, each 820 feet long. To receive radioactive waste from the chemical separation process, they built tank farms consisting of 64 single-shell underground waste tanks, and the project required 386 miles of roads, 158 miles of railway, and 4 electrical substations. The HEW used 780 cubic yards of concrete, 40,000 short tons of structural steel, and consumed $230 million for their project between 1943 and 1946. The B reactor at Hanford was the first large-scale plutonium production reactor in the world. It was designed and built by DuPont based on an experimental design by Enrico Fermi and originally operated at 250 megawatts. The reactor was graphite moderated and water cooled, just like the reactor that blew up in Chernobyl. No containment. It consisted of a 28 by 36 foot, 1,200 short ton graphite cylinder lying on its side, penetrated through its entire length by 2004 aluminum tubes. Construction on B reactor began in August of 1943 and was completed just over a year later on September 13th of 1944. The reactor went critical in late September, and after overcoming nuclear poisoning, produced its first plutonium on November 6, 1944. Plutonium was produced in the Hanford reactors when a uranium-238 atom and a fuel slug absorbed by a neutron to form uranium-239. It rapidly undergoes beta decay to form neptunium-239, which rapidly undergoes a second beta decay to form plutonium-239. The fuel slugs were then transported by rail to 3 huge remotely operated chemical separation plants called canyons that were located about 10 miles away. This first batch of plutonium was refined in the 221 plant from December 26, 1944 to February 2nd of 1945 and delivered to the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico on February 5th, 1945. It expanded during the Cold War. Of course, General Electric was heavily involved. They assumed management of the Hanford Works under the supervision of the newly created Atomic Energy Commission. In 1946, as the Cold War began, the United States faced a new strategic threat in the rise of the Soviet nuclear weapons program, which we learned from our reading of Chelyabinsk in Russia, where the meteor exploded. That was what was going on in Russia. That was their Hanford, although they had 3 major accidents there and actually closed the city for decades. Hanford was at its peak production from 1956 to 1965. Over the entire 40 years of operations, the site produced about 63 short tons of plutonium, supplying the majority of the 60,000 weapons in the U.S. arsenal. And you can read more at Wikipedia. This is actually a very good article on Hanford. I've read from this a number of times, and those tanks, they've moved some of the radioactive waste out of the tanks, but it's not just liquid that they have stored there. All of the operating machinery, like the cranes that would lift this stuff out of the canyons, all of that was so radioactive that it had to just be buried on the site. So whatever kind of leakage has occurred over the last 50, 60 years has probably gone into the groundwater as well. And it's a very, very sad situation. And reading or listening about the hydrogen, the possibility of a hydrogen explosion there too, brings us to our next article, How to Make a Homemade Gas Mask. Okay, I don't know if you saw this. I posted this on Radchick the other day, and everybody loved it. It was from survivalrecon.com. They had reprinted a homemade gas mask article from September 7th of 1942 that appeared in Time magazine. And this was an excerpt from the article. An emergency gas mask that can be made at home was demonstrated in Manhattan last week by the American Women's Volunteer Services. The necessary materials can be found in almost any home: a bathing cap, a small tin can, the transparent cover from a powder puff box, a bit of wire net from a fly swatter, 2 handkerchiefs, elastic ribbon, adhesive tape, and from the drugstore a few ounces of activated coconut charcoal and soda lime. The principle behind the homemade mask is simple. The assembly is more difficult. The rubber cap is fitted snugly over the face, and 2 holes are cut in it, one for the powder puff cover to look through, so that's like your little window, and one for the tin can respirator. The ends of the can are removed, replaced with wire net, and inside the can go the chemicals, 2 parts activated charcoal and 1 part soda lime, wrapped in the handkerchiefs. All openings in the cap are hermetically sealed with adhesive tape. An elastic ribbon harness holds the mask on tight, and an alternative model makes use of rubber baby pants instead of the bathing cap. And let me drop this article into chat so you guys can see the picture.
If a shower cap is all you have, you can always use a shower cap, but it won't work as well as a bathing cap. Well, they make great respirators these days.
Yeah, a lot of people, though, think you can just go to, like, an Army-Navy surplus and buy one of those old war masks. Like, they have them at my local surplus store. They have the Israeli ones, and they have German ones, and Polish ones, and Russian ones. But the thing is, the cans that they sell with those that you screw on, the filter part, is full of asbestos. So don't buy those.
No, go to Home Depot and get a state-of-the-art for people who like spray paint, the ones that remove chemicals and have charcoal.
Yeah, if you go to
A
even like
P100, I think, is the rating on that.
any kind of hardware store has those, and they're like $25
Good
for a
thing to have
brand new one.
around.
Now the old Cold War ones, those are cool looking if you want
Yeah.
to make it into something or maybe wear it for Halloween or something, but you don't want to use that to breathe through. They're kind of just for collectors. They're not really functional. Like you need, and the really like hardcore nuclear, biological, and chemical masks, those are a couple $100. I don't know if those are definitely not within a lot of people's budget. They offer some other suggestions on this article to swap out things like they asked in the article underneath, what the hell is a powder puff box? I think they mean that Kleenex, the thing that, you know, where the Kleenex come out of, that slit. There used to be like plastic, or there are in some of the boxes, like using that plastic. And then they say you could use a sock, or you could use some pieces of screen, and duct tape would be better than using transparent tape. And you might have trouble finding coconut charcoal and lime soda. 2-liter bottle. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. If you live around Hanford, you might want one of those.
Charcoal to cool.
And we also have this lovely interview from Steven Starr that we want to play. And he's talking about Fukushima. This is a guy, you could kind of tell from the interview, he's kind of outside his comfort zone by going on air and doing this interview. It's not really like, he's not a journalist, but he's acting like one, because after looking into the Fukushima situation, he realized like people really need to be talking about this. They need to be aware of how bad the situation is. And he explains things really well. So we'd like to play a clip from that show for those people who haven't heard it already. You can download the whole audio from Any News, and it will probably run to the end of the show. So we will be back on Thursday if we run out of time at the end of today. So Noki, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right, Professor Steven Starr. I really, really like this one.
Yeah, me too.
There we go.
A lot of unanswered questions that neither the Japanese or U.S. governments, the nuclear power industry, and the mainstream news media seem interested in answering. For example, how much nuclear radiation was emitted in the atmosphere in the weeks and months after the disaster? Are the reactors continuing to leak radioactive particles into the air? How much radiation was leaked into the Pacific Ocean? Are the reactors continuing to leak radioactive water into the ocean? How far did the atmospheric radiation travel? Which parts of the world receive the heaviest doses of radiation? How much of the ocean is contaminated by radioactive seawater? How far will the mass of radioactive seawater expand in coming years? Is it safe to eat tuna? What about Alaskan salmon? Is it safe to eat anything made with foodstuffs taken from the Pacific Ocean? How do we know whether rice and other food products were imported from Japan? How long will the radioactivity remain in the Pacific? What is the present state of the reactors? What are the dangers if Japan is hit by another mega earthquake? I've got a lot of other questions, and I'm trying to get the answers for you and me. I've invited Professor Steve Starr to the program today to help us. He serves as the senior scientist for Physicians for Social Responsibility. His articles on nuclear issues have been published by many organizations around the world, including the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. He is an expert on the environmental consequences of nuclear war. In 2011, Professor Starr addressed the UN General Assembly on the dangers that nuclear war poses to the human race. Professor Starr, welcome to TruNews.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate you taking time to answer some of these questions because the news media would like us to believe that Fukushima is old news. It went away. That's a subject from 2011. But you and I both know it hasn't gone away. It's not going to go away for a long time. Where do we start? Let's just start about at the beginning of the crisis. At this point in time, what do we know about how much radiation was emitted into the atmosphere and the sea?
Well, an enormous amount was emitted. I try to use some of even the official sources from the Japanese, so these can't be questioned quickly by the nuclear industry. But in November 2011, the Japanese Science Ministry reported that long-lived radioactive cesium had contaminated 11,580 square miles of the land surface of Japan, and about 4,500 square miles, about almost the area the size of Connecticut, was found to have radiation levels that exceeded Japan's allowable exposure rates at that time. So that's a huge amount of the area. Of course, Japan responded by, rather than evacuating, they just increased the acceptable exposure levels by 20 times. So that's one way, that if you can pretend that the radiation is not dangerous, then that's one way to make it acceptable.
Well, I was going to ask if there are Japanese people still living there, and you just answered the questions. So the way the Japanese government... Yeah, go ahead.
There is an exclusion zone, which is important to know. That's about 230 square miles of area where people are not permitted to live. Parts of it they now allow people to visit during the day. Some parts are not visitable, are so high that you can't go in there without any sort of protective gear, and even that's probably not safe. And there's a exclusion zone around the destroyed Chernobyl reactor of about 2,000 square miles. So this is what happens when a reactor blows up and huge amounts of long-lived radionuclides escape. It does create intense areas of contaminated surface area that are around the reactors.
Presently, is there any radioactivity being released in the atmosphere at the present time?
Well, the state of the reactors right now, the Japanese basically lied about what happened with reactors for months. They said they were trying to prevent a meltdown, when in fact they knew that within the first couple days, all reactors 1, 2, and 3 at Fukushima Daiichi had melted down and completely, and they actually melted through the steel containment vessels. So there was a worst case scenario that they were trying to hide. They even knew that at that time enormous amounts of radiation were released over Japan, and some of it even went over Tokyo. We have images from Los Alamos that show that happening. The U.S. was tracking it and giving the information to Japan, but the Japanese didn't warn their people. They allowed them to remain. Really, that's the reason why Obama came out and publicly said that American citizens should get 50 miles away from the plant. They'd like to retract that if they could. But, as of now, it's not nearly the same order of magnitude that's coming up, but there is about 1 billion becquerels of radiation per day that are coming off the melted cores. They're still having to pour 10 tons of water over each of the cores every day. They're trying to filter. They've set up elaborate filtration systems to filter out the radiation. But it's kind of jury-rigged, and since the melted cores crack the containment vessel, there really is no containment. So as soon as they pump the water in, it leaks out again. It's just kind of an ongoing process. It's not a good situation. The cores emit so much radiation, gamma radiation, that they actually disassociate the hydrogen and the oxygen in the water that's being pumped in. It creates the danger of a hydrogen explosion. So they are still also actively pumping nitrogen gas into the reactor cores to prevent hydrogen buildup and explosion. So if you consider that a cold shutdown or stable, then you probably work for the nuclear industry.
So you're saying that there is still a danger of a hydrogen explosion?
Yeah, they have to pump. Arnie Gunderson, who is really the guy that can give you the most precise answers, he's a nuclear engineer. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Yes.
I try to act as a reporter, but he says that for probably the next 6 or 7 years, they're going to have to continue to pump nitrogen into these cores to minimize the danger of hydrogen explosion, which of course is what blew up the reactor buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4 shortly after the accident took place.
And so the water is still running out into the Pacific Ocean, and this is going to continue for years.
Well, I think it probably is. You know, how do you quantitate this? They certainly are not giving out much information. There's a lot of groundwater that's pouring into the reactor cores. It's becoming highly radioactive. And, you know, they're right on the coast there. So, you know, the other thing that happened at the time of the accident, you had a long list of questions at the beginning of your introduction, and you mentioned the amount of radiation that went into the Pacific there. The French estimated that something like 733,000 curies of radiation were dumped in shortly after the reactors were destroyed. That's just an enormous amount. And that's of cesium-137, which is a long-lived radionuclide that has a half-life of about 30 years. So that whole area around there has just been terribly contaminated, and that's why you're finding fish, particularly bottom-feeding fish, are going to you know, pick up this stuff, because it didn't all just go out into the Pacific, and a lot of it did, but it's still settled there. And, you know, if it was on land, you could sort of try to create an exclusion zone like they have around the reactor, but of course in the ocean it's not really possible to do that. So I read just the other day they're thinking about putting nets up around there to prevent fishing. I don't know how well that'll work.
Do we know how far the radioactive seawater has traveled so far?
I've seen some images and some projections. I mean, it's all, you know, when you're talking about the Pacific Ocean, you have to base this on currents, but I do think that a lot of it has reached the plume that they call it. I've seen has probably reached somewhere near the Hawaiian Islands in that area of the Pacific.
It's near Hawaii at this point?
Yeah, it looked like from the image that I saw that it's somewhat more north of Hawaii, but and it's, I mean, when you start talking about radiation, you know, when you're in the Pacific Ocean, there is a big dilution effect. But what the nuclear engineers overlook in all of their analysis is what happens when radiation, these radionuclides get into ecosystems, because they tend to bioaccumulate in individual organisms, and then they biomagnify as they move up the food chain. And of course, fish don't just stay in one spot, and some of these, as you know, they've caught tuna up in California with cesium in it, so it's not, it's a bad situation. And I've had a real interest in the issue of bioaccumulation and cesium. I've just spent almost 8 months working as the general editor on a study that was done in Belarus with children that live in these contaminated areas around the destroyed Chernobyl reactor. And because much of Belarus, 40% of it was covered with fallout. And they found, they did over 400 autopsies and thousands of tissue samples, and found that the cesium becomes very concentrated in the heart and endocrine tissues, as well as the kidneys, the small intestine, pancreas, spleen, and liver. And so what happens is, and so you can monitor this because cesium is a gamma emitter, so it's gamma radiation you can measure outside of the body. They put these kids on chairs, and they can quickly do they do it in becquerels per kilogram. Becquerel is 1 atomic disintegration per second, you know, per kilogram of body weight. And they were able to correlate, you know, observe pathologies in these children, particularly with their heart, other things too, blood pressure, once they reached certain levels. And most of I mean, they had a hard time finding even a control group in Belarus of children that were negative that had 0 becquerels per kilogram, because the foodstuffs become so contaminated in these ecosystems that it's pretty hard to not eat contaminated food.
What are the consequences, long-term consequences of having an accumulation of cesium in your body?
Well, none of it's good. I mean, the thing is, complex life forms didn't evolve in the presence of cesium-137. And so this is the best analogy I heard was by a Japanese physician saying that these radionuclides they're like a kind of fire you can't put out. You know, we're used to coal and gas and oil, these fires, but because this comes from the breakdown of individual atoms and the energy that comes out of it, you can think of it as a form of fire, but it's destructive to DNA. You know, you can't really dilute it. You know, that's one of the problems. The Japanese are burning the waste, they mix it up, high-level waste with others, and they go, well, we're diluting it, but they're diluting themselves to think they could dilute it. But when it gets into your body, you know, these kids, one of the things, maybe you've heard of Chernobyl heart. It breaks your heart to see these videos of these kids with, you know, they have stroke and hypertension and heart attack, you know, 7, 8, 10, 12-year-old kids. It's not uncommon. And, you know, in other words, they have diseases that are more associated with old age. Also diabetes, because when it gets into the pancreas, it destroys the pancreatic cells and their ability to produce insulin. It destroys the glomeruli in the kidney, which is, you know, filters out, so it decreases your ability to excrete the stuff, and it also affects your blood pressure. So a lot of these kids have hypertension. And so less than 20% of the children in these areas of Belarus are considered to be healthy. And that's probably almost 200,000 children. But the World Health Organization and the International Atomic Energy Agency refused to look at the studies that were done in Belarus by these doctors and scientists. They measured over 100,000 children with this stuff. And in fact, they even threw the author of the studies into prison for 6 years. Which is part of the reason why I've been working on trying to get a viable translation of the study that was done in 2001 to try to make it public.
Is the nuclear industry suppressing these studies?
Well, they do it in a way by what they say is, well, this is not good science. These aren't scientifically done. There's a really interesting video if your listeners want to Google nuclear controversies on YouTube.